Hey, everybody. Today we're talking about podcasting equipment and answering questions about mics, audio interfaces, cameras, and whatever else you decide to ask about. Equipment can be a little overwhelming if you're new to content creation. So we're going to talk about the equipment and common myths and misconceptions about things. Stuff like the Yeti's a great starter mic for a podcaster, or the Yeti's a terrible mic. Spoiler alert, neither one is actually true. So let's go ahead and get started. If you're new to the live stream, this is Shop Talk for content creators, where we talk about everything about making content. We share tips and tricks and kind of educate and do some myth busting along the way. What makes our perspective unique is that we've sat on both sides of this table. As content creators ourselves, we know what it's like to build and grow a brand. And as service providers and consultants, we understand the kind of the business side of the industry. That means we can help creators understand the business aspects while also showing service providers what clients are actually looking for. So whether you're podcasting, streaming, or making videos, we're here to share what we've learned. And I'm Jesse. I'm a podcast editor, content creator, and I've started offering AI coaching and consulting services lately. So for anybody who is out there, I've been joined on Tuesdays with Matthew Bliss. So, Matt, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself or one thing they should know about you?
Absolutely. Well, if you haven't been on the stream so far, I'm Matthew Bliss. I am the founder of mpod.com. And I am also a podcast producer, editor, looking to be a consultant and teacher and all that kind of thing. Got a history doing podcasts, been working with lots of different types of equipment, including the Blue Yeti. And yeah, it's just going to be a great time getting into the equipment thing, because I've got a feeling that's going to be the biggest thing that anybody asks, because it's the base level. You can't have a podcast without having equipment, right? And it really, I really think it takes having a history with podcasting, with creating content, to be able to have the kind of opinions that we're going to share today. And, having 4 or 5 podcasts myself in the past, as well as doing it for clients, you get across a bunch of different types of equipment. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can chat about today.
Yeah, I agree. I've run across so many different equipment recording scenarios working with clients. But before we start talking about mics, let's talk about the one thing that is probably more important than the mic when it comes to recording or getting high quality audio. I'm not talking about a Rodecaster. I'm talking about your recording space. I know it's not a fun topic. It's kind of boring talking about acoustics and all of that stuff. But while we kind of minimize the impact of poor acoustics, or let me restart that. We can minimize the impact of poor acoustics by choosing a good mic and positioning it well. But the problem is that we still have to apply some processing to clean it up, because those poor acoustics, they still come through even if you're using an SM7B or a Rodecaster or whatever. So the best recordings we can get are when we're recording in a good sounding space. So my biggest piece of advice is, instead of spending $900 for a Rodecaster Duo and an SM7B, get something like a Shure MV7 and put the rest of that money into treating your space. You're going to get better results, you'll sound better, and you'll need a lot less processing.
Definitely. It's missed so often. And the amount of times that you hear people complaining about the equipment they have because it sounds like it's coming out of a tin can, or it sounds really weird, or there's a lot of echo. Like, how do I stop the echo? The answer to that question is exactly what you just said. It's treating the room. And as boring as it is to think about how your voice and your sound reflects around a space, it provides the most value for any kind of post-production. Like, you can be the best editor in the world, but the less work you have to do on the editing side, the better quality it's going to be on the other end as well. So I love that. I learned that lesson way too late, I think, and I was only maybe 6 months to a year into podcasting at the time that I learned how to minimize that echo. So, yeah.
And that's why, like I said at the beginning of the stream, all of the things about the Yeti, those myths, they're not exactly true. The reason a Yeti is not a good starter mic for podcasters is because most starter podcasters haven't treated their space. So they get the Yeti, they record themselves, and they sound very tinny, or they're just sound really distant. All of these things, they're not necessarily the fault of the mic, but they're the fault of recording in a space that has poor acoustics. On the flip side, because of that, people recording in less than ideal spaces with a condenser mic, you have a bunch of people saying the Yeti's a terrible mic. If you use it, and that would apply to any condenser in an untreated space. If you take a Yeti and put it in a good sounding room, it's going to sound a lot better. It's still going to have kind of that cheap condenser sound, but most people listening aren't going to pick up on that. So the number one thing I recommend is putting a little effort into sound treatment. And that doesn't usually mean that really cheap foam. When it comes to foam, it can work, but if you get 1-inch foam, it's not going to do anything because you need thicker foam to address the actual problem frequencies. So you want to have various thicks starting at 2 inches, probably up to 4 or 5 inches. At 2 inches, you're just hitting kind of probably the high mids, but you're still getting a lot of issues down in the mids and the low frequencies. So that's where the thicker foam comes into play.
Yep. And the size of the space can tell you more about what you need to do as well. Like, there's a lot of voiceover setups that you'll see that are set up in wardrobes, like closets, that just have that egg carton kind of foam pinned up on all the sides. And sometimes they wonder why it sounds so dead in there. Like, it's not the right kind of dead sound that they want for voiceover work. And it's exactly as you said, it's absorbing the wrong type of frequency. And more often than not, I find myself giving clients advice to not go into small spaces without treatment. And I'd even advise going into bigger spaces with a bit of treatment, because, you know, the strength of the sound that's bouncing around the space reduces significantly when you're in a larger space for it to reduce in power, for lack of a better term. And when it gets to the stage of absorption, if you've got a thicker material to absorb that sound, like you were saying, and it's a weaker signal, it being further away, it's going to take less effort for the thicker material to absorb the right frequency that you want to get rid of and have less of it bounce back. So it's a really hard puzzle to put together and visualize. But it takes practice, and it takes playing around with these things a little bit. Like, I don't think anyone's going to walk away from this stream and go, they gave me the answers, I can run away and do that now. It takes testing. Every space is different.
It definitely takes some testing, and with so many podcasters moving into video, that adds a whole other wrinkle to it, because when you're doing just audio, you can hang up moving blankets behind you and all over and use whatever. But as soon as you start adding video, now we become more aware of our backgrounds, and we have to find better looking alternatives. And that's where there's a few companies out there that make professional looking acoustic panels. You can get them with that look like art, have your own logos put on them. I know there's GIK Acoustics. There's another one that I'm completely spacing out on the name, but they're out there.
Yeah,
so
in my personal opinion, I think a lot of content creators are going to be budget minded, and when they go and look at those professionally made acoustic panels, they're going to find that they're very expensive. Depending on your space, cheaper material can be used at the same time. Like, I'd considered them for my setup here. I am in an incredibly small room, which you may or may not be hearing from the audio that's currently on the stream. Sometimes the high frequencies bounce around quite a bit. There's an angled ceiling, so it kind of throws the bass around in weird directions and stuff. But I just have a couple of moving blankets that are maybe €6 each. What'd that be, like $7 US maybe? But I could have spent €1,000 getting panels to hang in the space, like you'd see in music studios, kind of like what you have behind you, Jesse. But they were just too heavy duty and too expensive. And I know there's a lot of DIY panel creation videos where you can get rock wool and 2x4s and just stick them together and get a fabric that you staple over the top, and it does kind of the same thing. So don't feel like you're resigned to spending $1,000 on treating your space. There are lots of different ways. Again, you have to play around with it to get to the right spot and hit the budget zone for you.
And that's why I kind of recommend, instead of spending money on equipment you don't really need, but you've already set aside a budget for that, spend that on putting it to the best use for addressing your acoustics. And like you said, there's so many ways to do it, from completely DIY with moving blankets, or I know people have set up like portable wardrobe racks where they just drape moving blanket over it so they can move it around the room and then put it back into their closet when they're done. There's all sorts of options. So there's really no reason not to put some effort into it if you want to sound your best.
Yeah, and just before we move on from it, let's go super low grade. Like, I worked with a client once, and she was propping up mattresses in a completely empty room behind her computer. That is the bare minimum you can do. Like, any post where you see someone in a hotel grabbing the couch cushions and like stacking them in a pillow fort around them, just do the bare minimum and think about where the sound is bouncing first. If it's coming from your mouth towards the screen, pad behind the screen where it's going to be strongest before it reflects anywhere else. And that's free. Like, presuming you have a couch or a sofa. I'm not sure if our cultural lingo is starting to clash there, but cushions, pillows, anything. Chuck it behind your computer, behind your microphone, however you record. And that's probably the cheapest way you can do it.
So let's talk about mics now. So there's USB mics, there's XLR mics, dynamic, condenser. There's a lot to unpack there. So let's talk about, you've got phones, laptop mics. First piece of advice I have is don't use laptop mics. Don't use the mic in your phone. They're laptop mics, let's start that over. The worst audio I've ever dealt with comes from laptop mics and AirPods. The corded earbuds, those are fine. The biggest issue is you have to be careful with the cord. If you have someone using them and has long hair, that hair needs to be tied back. And hold the cable out in front. Hold it in your hand so that it's not scratching against your clothing, because that is a noise we cannot take out, and it's really obnoxious to listen to.
Yeah. Necklaces, jewelry, metal studs, like in button-up shirts. And if you're a gesticulator and a mover, and that headphone thing is just, pendulous on your neckline and just bouncing off everything, it's going to be a bad time. But I have a contrary opinion for you. And this might be the first time that we disagree, so mark this, audience. This is the first disagreement we'll have. In my experience, I've found that laptop mics in general are absolute garbage. Completely agree. But the internal mic on MacBooks, at least from the M1 chip onwards, tends to be excellent. Like, it has Apple products except for the AirPods. AirPods are awful. Anything that you strap to your ear and doesn't have a microphone that can get in front of your face, this includes Bluetooth headphones of any type, forget it. Unless you can get the microphone in front of you and it doesn't reduce that signal, that's why AirPods are terrible. Imagine if someone was trying to talk towards your ear, but from the other side of the room and with objects in front of you. That's why it sounds so awful. But the onboard laptop mic in a MacBook is excellent, I've found. So as long as the user is wearing headphones that restricts that reverberant bleed that can come through, that quality tends to be pretty all right. But it's the only case where I will say an Apple device does a better job than anything else. That onboard microphone and the processing it has before it gets to wherever it needs to go tends to be pretty good. But maybe you'd disagree.
No, I find that the Apple mics, out of all of the devices, like the laptop mics I've heard, they are by far the best. I do wonder if part of what you're hearing is people using the built-in, whatever they call it, voice isolation when recording with their laptops.
I'd say it is, yeah. It's hardware-based, I think, a lot of that
Yeah.
stuff.
I am pretty sure that's only available on M Series Macs. So it's possible that's what you're hearing. I don't know if I've dealt with any of those. But, yeah.
But
I think you can.
It comes with a caveat. Like, if you can have an excellent MacBook microphone with a laptop that's in front of you and wearing headphones, that's great. If you're a fiddler, if you tap stuff, if you like typing as you're talking, forget about it. Like, that's why the laptop mics are terrible too, because they are so far away from you and down, just generally, as a microphone. It's not a good idea, I wouldn't think.
And, I mean, that's part of it, is it's still a microphone. It's a condenser microphone, so it's going to be sensitive to all of the sound around it. The acoustics, the pens, the typing, kid across the street yelling outside playing basketball, whatever the case is. And that's why it's so important to be able to work with your guest in positioning the microphone. It doesn't matter if they're using a laptop, if they're using a standalone mic like this, whatever they're using, we're going to get the best results if we can guide them through the process of positioning it to get the best sound. And let's figure out how to say this. You can get usable audio from a laptop mic. If your guest is using a laptop and that's what they have available to them, you can still get usable results. I don't recommend it for your own content because the truth is we're competing with everybody else out there. And if we are putting lower quality audio out there, we're just giving them an excuse to go watch someone else listen to some other podcast. So the better we can get our audio that's in everybody's best interest who's watching. So
That's it.
when it comes to laptops, I'll have clients grab books, boxes, whatever they can to raise their laptop up so it's a lot higher so we can get it closer to them. And it's the same thing with Yetis, Q2Us, ATR 2100s that come with little desktop stands. You're not going to get good sound just setting it on your desk because, like you were saying, it's a lot further away from your mouth. Even with a condenser mic, you still want it to be probably 3 to 6 inches away, depending on how loud your voice is. I have a pathetically quiet voice, so I need every mic within like an inch or two to get the best signal. That's why I can't really use an SM7B for something that I'm not doing post-production in, because it comes across too quiet. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got to crank the gain. That brings up the noise floor. So I think I did probably the first live stream with it. So apologies to everybody on that.
You did,
But
actually.
that's one of those things you have to learn by getting experience with different equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And the people out there watching, you don't have to have that hands-on equipment, but you need to find somebody who you trust who has that experience to be able to watch reviews. So I do reviews of equipment I use. There's Podcastage. If you're looking into mics, he's got you covered. I have no reason not to trust anything he says about a mic. There's Curtis Judd. And I think there's a few other people I'm not thinking of right now. But there's a handful of people out there reviewing the types of equipment we use in content creation. And there's a guy that does voiceover who does a lot of content.
Booth Junkie. Mike
Booth
Delgadio.
Junkie, that's him.
Yeah. I love his voice, but he hasn't done a mic review in a very long time. But he's reviewed a lot of the classics, so he'd be great to look at too. Yeah.
Because really, there's not a whole lot of new good mics coming out. Someone like Booth Junkie, he's going to be, and Curtis Judd, both are going at kind of higher end equipment because that's their world. Podcastage, he does mics. He'll test out anything at any price level. He's compared cheap mics to expensive mics. I mean, I think every mic review he does, he compares to like $3,700 Neumann, the U87. So, and he does a lot of comparisons. And the big takeaway from watching a lot of his videos is there's not a huge difference between various dynamic mics. There's not a huge difference between various condenser mics. You have to kind of have well-trained ears to hear the subtle differences between them. But your average listener, they're not going to be able to hear any difference between something like a $50 2100X versus the whatever an SM7B costs. Your average listener isn't going to hear that difference, and they're definitely not going to stop listening or stop watching your content because you're not using an SM7B. All they care about is that it sounds good enough.
Yeah. Although the SM7B tends to be the gold standard recommendation from a lot of people, not for the reason that it gives you great quality audio, but that people expect to see it on video. That's most of the reason why it's there. But I love that you mentioned Bandrew Scott Podcastage compared to Booth Junkie, Mike Delgadio, because they are both ends of a spectrum, where Podcastage has a very high voice, I'd say. Like, it's very it's not nasally, but if you listen to Booth Junkie compared to Podcastage, between the two, Booth Junkie is very deep, very muscular, authoritative. He's just got an excellent voice. He matches my tone a lot more, which is why I watch more of him. But my point there is that you've got two ends of the spectrum there. If you can reflect on what your own voice sounds like, what is the most ideal person to follow for you in terms of what a mic review is going to tell you about the environment they record in and their type of voice and how they project the weird intricacies of how they do things, then that's going to be a good person for you to follow. With our experience, it's easy to compare things in a vacuum, like you said, where people aren't going to be able to tell the difference between the XLR version of the MV7 versus the USB plugged-in version. When Bandrew Scott says the USB version is actually better than the XLR connection for whatever reason. But find someone who's like you that you can follow and get the advice from, and that's going to be the best way for you to go, whoever that ends up being. It might be us. Well, I mean, you. I haven't done any microphone reviews at all. I think I refuse to at this point.
I mean, the one thing I wish is that there was someone out there doing mic reviews for women, because that's one space where I just don't see it. And hopefully when we get more time, I'd love to get Tara involved in some of these so we can do reviews and have a female voice on there to give both sides of, not really sides, but to give something to women out there to hear what mics sound like for them.
Yeah, and to give you a good idea, because I've had a few female clients that I've recommended stuff for. I had one client who sounded amazing on a Yeti, on a Blue Snowball. For those who don't know, if you're thinking about the Yeti and we're telling you that it's both a terrible and an okay microphone, the Snowball is the next level down. Like it's shaped like a sphere. You can barely attach it to like an arm or a stand or anything. And it's about a quarter of the price usually of the Yeti. But on this particular person, in their seated and treated space, their voice sounded unreal in post-production. Same with another client. I recommended to them the Rode Podcaster Mark II, and that sounded amazing on her as well. And I don't think there's any other microphones I've recommended to people. So yeah, like for it, as much as, it brings up the idea of genders and things being different, we are just, the makeup of the type of voices we have is just different. And every single person is going to be different with the mic recommendations you get. And the problem I have looking that stuff up is it tends to be voiceover artists, female voiceover artists who share that kind of stuff. And more than usually, they've invested in like a TLM 103, which is like $700. A female podcaster isn't going to be spending that kind of money early on. They're going to end up with something a bit cheaper that might not be geared towards their voice in a particular way. So yeah, completely agree. Very long way to say I agree, but that's my experience with female clients anyway.
And in my experience, the biggest difference between cheaper mics and more expensive mics is the amount of EQ we have to do. Something like, I don't have a Samson Q2U. I haven't tried one in person, but I've worked with a number of clients who use it. I have an Audio-Technica ATR 2100X. I've worked with a bunch of people who use that mic. I see a lot of people saying they're basically the same mic, but what I hear is the 2100X has this mid-frequency bump that can be really obnoxious on some voices, that needs to be really cut pretty heavily. I haven't run into that with the Samson Q2U. Compare that to like the Shure MV7 higher end dynamic mics like that, the RE20, the SM7B, they tend to work, they tend to be a lot more neutral. So they work better on more voices, and you don't get those weird kind of mismatches of frequencies being boosted that just make some voices, just unflattering. And that's where you hear people talk about matching the mic to the voice. You can compensate for that through EQ, but again, EQ's one of those things where if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't have good monitoring, you can actually be making things worse. So that's what I've heard is the biggest difference between sort of the budget mics and the more expensive dynamics, is I just don't have to EQ as much. Though I will say with the SM7B, since it is so flat really, it needs more EQ to get the best out of it. Female voices tend to work really well on it because the way they tend to have more of those higher frequencies that help it with clarity. A lot of guys' voices tend to sound a little more muddy with an SM7B.
And that's because of the frequency curve as well. Like what you'll find to add a bit of what they'd call sparkle in the industry. Like you'd want to add in some of the higher frequency to the EQ to a voice that's lacking it because it's missing it in the microphone. Whereas the female voice will generally sit in a higher frequency, so it adds it automatically for you. Like it's built in to the female voice, and so you don't have to do it in EQ. And the biggest unlock for anyone trying to figure this out for themselves, just objectively with a bunch of charts, is finding those frequency diagrams that are sometimes provided by the manufacturer. The microphones will generally supply it. You can't do it for your own voice. There must be someone offering a service that gives you a look at what your frequency of your voice would be. But for headphones, it's even the same. There are a lot of people who can spend a lot of time in post-production EQing or adjusting a microphone because of the way they're listening to it in their headphones. But the headphones are actually adding or removing from certain frequencies, which changes the ability to perceive the sound. So I'm not sure if we were going to talk about headphones at all today, but that's a thing to keep in mind, that if something sounds really bass heavy to you, really muddy, and yet you're looking at the EQ, if you have the ability to, and you don't see any mud inside that graph, inside that diagram when you're doing the measurement, the objective measurement, then it could be your headphones that are adding it. And that's why I went for a higher grade of headphone previously, where I used to use the Audio-Technica MX40s, M40Xs, I think they're called actually. Because what I realized was I was editing my own voice and I thought I sounded way too bassy, which I did, because that's what the headphones were telling me. And yet I changed to a different type of headphone and my EQ curve completely changed for the microphone I was using, because I was listening to a completely different microphone. So that graph, the frequency curve, or the frequency response graph, I think they call it, for any microphone that you can find and any headphones you can find, go as flat as you possibly can, or be aware of those points, like the boosted mids or the boosted highs or lows. And you can account for that in post-production, but, you know, every mic has their own sound as well. I'm not sure if we want to get too deep into that bit.
Well, I think you touched on something that is important for anybody who's editing their own podcasts or editing for others, and that's everything. Every speaker has its own EQ curve. The more consumer level stuff, the more that's shaped to make everything sound good. You use something like Beats, they want to boost up the the low end and probably the highs. So you might not have nearly as much mids because everything's boosted up so high. I've heard similar complaints about the ATH M40X headphones as what you just said. The whatever the 50Xs by Audio-Technica, they're a lot more flat. I had really good success with things translating using those.
Okay,
And
that's
then,
good to know, because I was gun shy about going from the 40s to the 50s. I was like, people on the internet are saying that the 50s are more muddy. Do I want to go there? So that's good for me to know.
and then, what kind of biodynamics are those?
They are the DT770S. No, DT770 Pro. So I'll try and get them in there. I know that you've had a few complaints about these, but I've found them to be an absolute game changer for myself. But it's the same way that if you go from a U87 from a Blue Yeti, you're going to feel that change. But I know that you've had a complaint about them, haven't you?
Yeah,
The higher frequency.
they're artificial sounding. They do not
Yeah.
sound, I don't know how else to put it. Something about the way different frequencies are boosted, it's not natural sounding. I would not be able to mix anything on it. I can't even listen to music with them. They are, no offense to anybody that uses them, but in my world, they're some of the worst headphones I've ever tried. And that makes me wonder why so many people recommend them. Maybe I'm really sensitive to where, let me see if I can pull up the frequency response on that. But there's something about the way I think the mids are boosted or cut that, yeah, I can't remember specifically.
So this is the secret of, like, in podcasting, in content creation, in anything, it's always an answer of it depends. By the way, if you hear noise in the background, it's me rooting around trying to find if there's a frequency response graph in the instructions in the box. But the it depends answer doesn't just say, well, you have to do your own research. It's that every upgrade or change you make is going to have an impact on your experience of the thing. And I think that's the experience of getting better and better at hearing the different aspects of audio. You fix one thing and you hear 10 other things that need to get fixed because of that issue. If you're like me, going from a bass heavy, probably low high frequency, or rolled off high frequency M40Xs into the Beyerdynamic DT770s, and there's a capacitive change you can make between models. I know there's different ohm levels for different models, but that change for me was so stark that, like, it sounded amazing, and I don't have an experience of any other type of headphone. But you might have an experience across other type of, audio engineering, like seriously, like completely neutral headphones. And the DT770s would be you rolling backwards, which would be crazy. It's all a relative measure, and also an understanding of our previous experience and what the change makes to that experience in any particular way. There's also the structure of our ear canals. That is completely different. There's also the vibrations of the headphone membrane in our skull and the size of our head. I found that I can't do podcast recordings anymore without having the monitoring from my audio interface, because I cannot deal with the reverberant noise that my own body makes through my head when I've got earphones in. Like, I need something that breathes, that doesn't try to noise cancel the environment, or some sort of open back kind of thing. I just can't talk that way anymore. I need to hear exactly what's coming out of my mouth through a no latency interface like the one that I have. And that's not something that I had to do like 3 or 4 years ago, because I started with a Blue Yeti that had no monitoring in it at the time. So it's all about the relative change and how you improve over time. And I think the only way to do a true objective measure is what audio engineers talk about, which is the do the export, test it in your headphones, test it on your speakers, test it in the car, test it on your phone, like test it in every single environment that any listener may be listening to that podcast on or that piece of audio. And if there's a problem across any of those, then you go back and try to fix it. But otherwise, there's not much you can do. It's the human condition.
And that's why accurate monitoring is so important for making EQ decisions. And because you can listen to it on 15 different devices, your car, your phone, your headphones, speakers, your laptop, whatever you have access to. And it's going to sound different every single place you listen to it. So you kind of have to average everything out, because if some places it's too bassy and others the bass is too weak, you don't know which one is true. So that's why EQ work is so challenging to do. You don't have until you have something you've been using for a long time that you learn how it translates to everything else, you don't have kind of a source of truth. And that's, the thing to keep in mind is when you go out to your car isn't going to sound just like everybody else's car. Your headphones, what you hear in your headphones is going to sound different from what I hear in my headphones. And to anybody using Audio-Technica ATH-50Xs, and those are going to sound different from Beats or this headphone or that headphone. Everything sounds different. So we need to, it's just a learning process, and that is why I really recommend using something like Sonable Smart EQ if you don't have good monitoring, because leverage the machine learning algorithms to help you with something like that, so you don't have to guess as much as to whether you're doing good or inflicting harm on your audio when you're doing your EQ work.
But there's a secret tip in there somewhere, like a saving grace that I see a lot of podcasters particularly getting, that they kind of stumble across when they're editing themselves for maybe the first time or the first few times. They listen to the audio, they try to edit it, and they say, oh, but it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound right coming out that way. The thing to remember is that a podcast listener, unless they know you in person, and even then, like we can talk about the reverberant activity and the humidity in the air and the way that affects the transmission of sound to ear canals that are pointed in different directions. It's really unusual. But the way that someone hears you in their podcast player, they don't have anything to compare that to. That's how they hear you. In the YouTube video, that's how they're going to hear you. They don't have the original audio of meeting you in person to compare that to. So if you're concerned about how it sounds when you're editing it yourself, ignoring the cognitive bias of us all thinking our own voices sound like garbage, remember that they're only hearing what you give them. So as long as it's the same across most of the episodes that you put out, and be fairly consistent with what that output is like, then they're not going to be able to tell the difference. Now, you have sneakily brought up that's the 80 ohm response. I'm pretty sure that's what I've got. Can't tell. But yeah, I thought they were pretty flat. But I guess I got a different frequency curve there. So what are we looking at there, Jesse? Talk me through why you think you have a terrible time.
because they're not flat. I mean, we've got a pretty 5 dB boost. Basically, it starts gradually at 20 hertz up to probably 150 hertz. That's a pretty big boost in the high end. Then you've got a huge cut between 150 and 300 of about 5 dB. We're flat-ish through from 300 to 2K. Then we've got a slight little bump at about 2500. Then we've got a huge cut of 8 dB at 4K.
Yeah.
So basically we're cutting out frequencies from 3 to 5K, 3 to 6K. And then we've got a huge bump of about 6 dB at 7K.
Yeah. And that's usually the hot zone where sibilance starts to make its way into the signal.
Yeah, so we're boosted from 6K up through probably 12K, and then we start to fall back off. So for me, it's probably the two big cuts mixed with that big boost in the high end that makes it sound really plastic to me.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's and bear in mind, watcher, this is just for listening. Like, this is any sound that goes through your headphones into your ears using the DT770s. This is how the frequency of those headphones affect the signal that you're getting. So there's a bit of a bass boost there, which is interesting. But in particular, the high frequency of the graph there from 7K upwards, that would be the hot zone where you just would find it intolerable if you were particularly sensitive to sibilance. And if you're watching and you don't know what the sibilance is, the sharp S sounds that you get, they tend to occur in a very high frequency in reference to the graph that you can see there. It's around that spot. So obviously, they've felt a need to elaborate on that section of the graph to give it the sparkle that I was talking about before. For some reason, I don't know. In any case, I haven't heard any complaints from clients yet about the way I process people's audio. But I remember at the time, upon advice from someone who had recommended me the headphones initially, that I should have sibilance, a built-in sibilance plugin on anything that I do. And he told me a couple of times where the sibilance is quite high in what I was processing at the time. So I kind of trained myself for what to listen for, and now have a baseline that I add to any kind of plugin chain that I use. But knowing this, I might need to be a bit more rigorous with the with the sibilance tamping down that I do. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, because sibilance, let's see. Sibilance tends to start lower than a lot of people think. So this cut is probably cutting down a lot of that sibilance, but it's also cutting down any other good frequencies in that range. And this is kind of what I was talking about consumer level headphones being tuned to sound good. Our ears are sensitive to those sounds between 3 to 6, 7K. That's why so many of us have such strong aversions to sibilance. When it comes to music, that's where cymbals live. So that's why we have a huge cut right there. When we're doing EQ work, are we compensating too much because there's that cut there? Or are we maybe, in your case, if you're hearing the sibilance, that frequency range, and it sounds fine to you, you're probably not touching it. Whereas somebody like me, who's using something that's got a flatter response, I'm hearing a lot more sibilance than you are because you're not hearing it in your headphones because they've already done the favor of cutting that out for you.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And again, like if someone is jumping in right now expecting us to be talking about microphones, we're talking about headphones at the moment. But the graph that you have here is the kind of graph that we would expect to see with microphones as well. And like headphones would be great if they're flatter for processing any kind of audio. Would you recommend, Jesse, the type of microphone that you get to be as flat as possible? Or would you just recommend for people to anticipate what the frequency curve is like for a particular microphone in order to deal with it?
I think for most content creators, there's no way to know that. My advice is just get a mic you can afford, and you're going to learn from that. If you get it and it just sounds terrible on your voice, that tells you, okay, you can pull up the frequency response to see where it's boosting things and realize, okay, this mic isn't working for me. What can I look for that isn't going to enhance this section of my voice? Like I've got a lot of resonance around 700 hertz, and then I've got kind of some nasal frequencies, which again is why the ATR 2100X doesn't work very well on my voice. And I found it with other voices too. So I guess to answer your question, it's more about just trying stuff out. And I think trying to pair a mic to a certain voice is really challenging unless you have a ton of experience with a ton of different mics. That's something you more or less see in studio environments where you've got audio engineers who've been doing this for a long time, who have a locker full of mics. They can go put 5 mics up, test them with the singer, see which one sounds best. Most of us don't have the opportunity to just go grab 5 different mics to see which one sounds best. So just kind of a blanket recommendation. The Shure MV7 is a mic that I have not heard it sound bad with any voice, and I've probably dealt with 20 to 30 recordings, men, women with low voices, women with high voices, men with low voices, men with high voices, and everything in between. And it just, from what I've heard so far, it sounds universally good on every voice I've heard it on.
That's great. See, my version of that, after experience with a few clients and recommendations, is the Rode PodMic USB version. I've found that microphone in particular does a fantastic job on any voice that I've had it in front of. Thinking about it, actually, a lot of female clients that I've seen just momentarily, like for very short kind of like short jobs that I do through a particular project that I work with a couple of lads out of the UK on, Activate Your Podcast, if anyone is curious to investigate. With the few people we've recommended the PodMic to, it sounded great for them as well. So maybe the mid-range microphone for people with no audio interface and just a USB connection, maybe the Shure MV7 is on the level with the Rode PodMic USB. Or maybe we need to do a head-to-head one day and compare the two as which comes out on top. But I'm not surprised about the MV7. I actually tried the MV7X. I thought it was awful on my voice. I thought it was way too hot and bassy and compressed. But now I'd be very interested to try the MV7 and see if that does better for me.
Yeah, everyone I know who's tried both, they've I know when they first came out, the general consensus was the XLR output just didn't sound as good as the USB.
Yeah.
And that could extend to the MV7X, which is the XLR only version. And I think part of that could be with the USB version, they've built the interface into it. So they can tune that to the mic itself.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't surprise me that they tuned it to make the mic sound as good as possible when using the USB connector. That's just conjecture here, so I don't know if that's true or not, but that would be my guess.
Well, the next level up is to test is the Shure MV7i, which includes a XLR-based audio interface that you can daisy chain between microphones and then connect the microphone to the computer via USB and have it act as both the audio interface and the direct connection for the microphones of that audio interface. I think, I might have that wrong, but the MV7i, that would probably be the baseline test to see if having an onboard audio interface to adjust that stuff, not just the Aphex, software-based changes you can make to the system, actually make a difference. But this is nerding out really hard on microphones at the moment. I'm not sure if we would have lost anybody.
Well, I did do a video where I compared the XLR versus USB output of the MV7, and to my ears, I didn't really hear much difference. So I'm not sure what these other people were hearing. But in that video, on my voice and my space, I wasn't hearing a huge difference between the two. And I think I was recording that through probably a 2i2 interface with no processing on.
Makes sense. Interesting. Yeah, now you've got me all worried though. I'm worried I need to change my headphones. But I feel like I'm getting by anyway. Didn't realize I was slumming it with a high frequency boosted headphone.
Well, it's like what you said earlier. Go and listen to stuff you've produced in various places. Take some notes to hear how it's translating across the board. You may be fine. But you've got...
But now, like, the thing that many people wouldn't talk about being the 5% of people who edit audio and get good enough to be able to edit it well for other people is that the psychological biases start to come in again with the edits. So again, you talking about the monitoring is important because it keeps you restricted to a set of guidelines for yourself for editing particular audio based on the frequencies and trying to dial it in well and have the output be right. But it's very easy for us to edit and plug in, adjust our way in an entire loop to end up back where we started because we edit a little bit here, we scoop the bass, but now it sounds really empty on the bass. So now that you add another EQ plugin, you scoop the mids because you want to get the bass back. And then you plug in again, and after you do some denoising, you do another EQ, and you go, oh, it sounds too high frequency. Let's, roll off the high frequency and boost the bass. And all of a sudden, the sound kind of goes in a loop in the way that you do it. You keep fixing problems, and you end up adding more problems back that you fixed before. My point is, in a very roundabout way, is to say that when you get to the level that we're at, I think it's very easy to convince yourself that the audio isn't right when you get told that something is wrong. But you have to use your objectivity as much as possible. Like, listen to it, as you said, take notes, and be happy with what you've produced sometimes based on the output and not on what other people can tell you. I think it was one of the first streams we did. We talked about giving feedback to other podcasters about their work or what they could do better in the edit. That ties very similarly to this advice for yourself, I think.
Well, and to take it a step further, I think EQ in particular is one of those things that I'd have no problems telling somebody to just skip that process altogether. Because in most cases, when you're EQing, if you're doing anything but doing kind of a subtle boost or cut, you're probably doing too much, especially with boosts. 1 or 2 dB is a pretty significant boost. If you're doing, I don't even think I'll have to see if I can find it real quick, but it seems like every 6 months I see something on Facebook where someone's trying to help, but they're saying, here's how you EQ audio. Here's my settings. Use these. And
copy my settings.
And it was like a 10 decibel boost in the high end, like a 15 decibel high shelf. And it's like, no, that's just not good. Don't tell people to copy these settings. I'm guessing they're coming from people who are using really bad headphones. So, or actually probably they're dealing with probably like a gaming headset that has a really narrow frequency response. So it cuts, and that's another reason why the AirPods sound so bad. It's not just where they're positioned, but they cut off the low frequencies, they cut off the high frequencies. They're very band limited. So if you're dealing with a recording with a gaming headset, AirPods, you find there's not a lot of high end here. I need to boost it. There's no richness. There's no low frequency to my voice. I need to boost it. That goes back to the issue of trying to fix things because they're not there. Mm-hmm. And that's why, like I said, when it comes to EQ, it's something where most listeners aren't going to notice if you've EQ'd it or not, especially if it's EQ'd well. So unless you have a very problematic frequency, like a just kind of howling resonance, your average listener's not going to hear a difference. They're not going to stop listening because you didn't EQ it. And it's so easy to, like you were saying, second guess ourselves and spend a ton of time on the EQ work. And that's why I've just cut that out of the equation. I just use Sonable EQ, train it, throw it on. Does that sound good? Okay. And then I move on.
Yeah. I think I cut out for a little bit there, guys. So if I was a bit jittery on the video, I apologize. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's part of the reason why you don't take audio editing advice from gamers and streamers. This is an industry-wide problem that I will just say very succinctly here. Gamers, Twitch streamers, people who stream games on the internet, they love a big bass boost and they scoop their mids so that it doesn't sound weird. Like there's a tone, there's a sound that people go for in gaming, and a lot of products have been created specifically for this purpose. I guarantee you that there's a gaming setting on the Rodecaster Pro or the Rodecaster Pro 2 that adds a curve that has a huge bass boost. The Go XLR, the Helion XLR or whatever, the SM7B for this reason, it's sounding very muddy, is why it's very popular in the gaming space as well. Don't take your advice from gamers or people who only stream. Look for people like us.
Music producers.
Yeah, on the very other end of things. Like they'll say, you take your U87 that you just spent $4,000 on 12 years ago, and already, like, they've lost you.
Well, but even with something like EQ, when you're working with music, you've got a vocal, and even if it's a ballad with just a piano, your voice is fighting against the frequencies of the piano. So your EQ approach is going to be different than when you have dialogue in isolation. So you see a lot of boosting of frequencies to help the music or help the vocal cut out or cut through the music. That's why when you see, I do not like the SM58 as a podcasting mic because it's got a frequency boost in the upper mids to help it cut through guitars and drums and the frequencies that it would otherwise be fighting against. If you're looking for something like a $100 dynamic mic, XLR, instead of the SM58, look at the Sennheiser E835. To me, that's a more pleasing sounding mic for podcasting.
There is a lot more that podcasters should not take from music as well. Like saturating the audio in particular ways, having 6 compressors running in parallel to dial down to the main mix, getting certain signals for audio, for vocals from certain plugins that is completely unnecessary for something like podcasts or what we're doing right now, like just a general streaming conversation. I think there's a lot of detail you can go into there. Like I've bought Gullfoss on the wanting to test it as a means to improve the quality of my audio. For those who don't know, Gullfoss is I'm going to butcher this too. You're going to have to correct me, but it's not an AI-based plugin, but it's a plugin that uses machine learning to detect and duck certain frequencies in certain circumstances, not for dialogue, but for sound in general. Comparing sidechained mixes based on certain I'm even explaining it poorly. In any case, it's way overkill for podcast editing, which is what I generally do, and never found an advantage to it. And yet it sounds really good the way that audio engineers talk about it in the context of music, or, film editing and dialogue editing for TV and stuff like that. There's a lot of places you can go that are unnecessary.
I agree. And let's take a second and pause things and just ask that if you're enjoying this video, the live stream, replay, however you're viewing it, to give it a thumbs up and share it with anyone who you think might benefit from it. And if you're watching the replay and you have questions, you can send it to us on the website at tanziaster.com/ask-a-question. And I should have a little thing here. Let's do this. There you can see where to go. If you've got questions and you're here in the live stream, feel free to ask them. We're here to help. But let's go ahead and take that down. One thing that I think that content creators kind of underestimate, but others overestimate, is the importance of the equipment itself. There's this idea that a Rodecaster and the SM7B is going to make you sound so much better than using something like a Samson Q2U. The law of diminishing returns hits at pretty low price points these days. So we really don't need to have the most expensive gear to create content that's going to be appealing to our audience. But like we talked about, you don't want to just use your laptop's built-in mic and webcam and call it a day. So you want to invest a little bit to get a standalone mic.
Yeah.
For some reason, the built-in webcams, like we were talking about the MacBooks, how their microphones are really good, their webcams are terrible. I don't know why they haven't. They put good cameras in their phones, but why they can't put some of that technology into their laptops is beyond me. But even if it was better, at a minimum, if you're doing video, get yourself a good high quality webcam. You don't necessarily need a like mirrorless, or if you just use your phone. Your phone's going to be better than any webcam on your computer.
That's right. And that's the funny thing. There's even a direct comparison I did with someone where they were recording with their webcam front on and then had their phone as a side profile that we could cut between for like a solo sort of video. And the phone quality was just through the roof. I think you can afford to pay less money for a microphone. As we said, your starting point has to be the beginning, and that's it. You need a starting point. But for the webcam, spending a bit of money there does take you a lot further. Camera quality and the way it performs on a device, all those things are super important. The maneuverability of the camera for a start, like laptop cams, forget about it. You can't move them without moving the entire laptop. And then if that's your microphone, you're also moving the microphone around too. But the camera itself, spend a bit of money on it and it can do wonders for you. We will get to it eventually. Oh, look at that. That's the phone on an arm.
That is my phone slipping, but that's... Just stay there. But that's the quality of a phone. It's a terrible angle, but...
It's doing the job. Yeah.
It's hard trying to find the right angle, but it's...
This is the playing around.
It's more than enough. It's clear, and it'll give you... It doesn't give you the fancy background, like the blurred background that you get with the mirrorless. But the audio or the video quality is really good.
Yeah. It does look pretty good. And you can dial that stuff up in post-production as well. Post-production for video is probably not something talked about in podcasting a lot at the moment. But the ability to color grade, increase the saturation, the contrast, all those kinds of things in video editors that are installed on your device, like a DaVinci Resolve's, Premiere's, any other kind of editor that you can imagine. I can't imagine anyone would have Avid just for a podcast, but hey, who am I to complain? But yeah, pick the high quality webcam if you can. If you can't, use the phone and position it well. And to give you an idea, the quality, what I'm using right now is a webcam. It's the old Brio 4K that I managed to get in 2021, I think, 2020 or 2021. It's the 4K version. It's not the newer package. It's the older one. And I think at the time in Australian, it was probably around 400 Australian dollars, which would be like $200 US. I think you guys get things pretty cheap these days. And the thing that I've changed with the setup of this webcam, because it doesn't look like a webcam, it actually looks pretty decent, and I've got a decent frame rate going. That's because I've got a very heavy-duty light just over here that's filling up the webcam space to illuminate the room. Means that you can reduce the gain, reduce the input stuff that makes it good. See, I don't even have the lingo yet, but do you know what I mean? Like a couple $100, and you can kind of get close to the quality that you'd expect from the DSLR or the mirrorless cameras that you can spend thousands on. Like, you don't just have to drop cash to get at a quality that's decent for a podcast or for content.
Yeah, the Brio 4K, that's a good camera. That's what Tara uses for most of her meetings and whatnot. We both use Canon mirrorless cameras for our bi- our kind of higher quality content.
Mm-hmm.
I was using a Canon R8. Now I'm on an R5C, which is completely overkill, but it does 4K for days without overheating. We also use it for video production work, so it's not like I bought it just to use as a webcam. We like to have versatility, but kind of like what we were talking about in the beginning about the most important thing when it comes to recording audio is your space. When it comes to video, the camera is important, but the lighting is just as important, if not more so. Because it looks like I'm in this really well-lit room, but if I turn off my 2 key lights, this is what I look like. I'm in a completely dark room.
This is the thing, that the less hard the camera has to work and the less input it takes in, the better light you get and the higher quality the signal that ends up going into whatever the interface is. The translation isn't the same for every camera that exists, but yeah, lighting is super important. Oh, look at you flexing the dimmers there.
So I can go dimmer and still have good quality. And that's the thing. You see all sorts of different styles. You see people who have really dark rooms, who have really minimal, like purple or pink type lighting behind them, blue, whatever color it is as an accent. You can only do that if you're using some kind of a mirrorless type camera. It's a lot harder to get that kind of quality with a webcam because you don't have the same type of flexibility in lens choice.
I can show you why too, because my webcam, I'm going to try and get this so that I can get the LED on the split screen here. I just got to make sure it's on screen. So it actually looks pretty good, the color I've picked, but the refresh rate on the LEDs that I have sitting back there and the gain setting that is as low as it can go without affecting the signal. If you have a good look at the light just there, very closely, like you watching at home, like lean into the screen and have a good look at it, and you'll see that it's actually flickering very slowly. Maybe not even. It could be Ecamm fixing this, but because of the LED refresh rate being different to the refresh rate of the camera and the quality of the camera and the software required to drive the signal, it's flashing in the background. Kind of like when you try to take a video with your phone and the refresh rate of the lights in the room are different to what your camera can absorb. You get that flashing effect. Like if you take it at the gym or something and they've got LEDs all over the ceiling. It kind of happens with webcams too. And it's almost unavoidable. Good lighting scenarios like the one that I have, they tend to be to fix that problem. But it's unavoidable with webcams. There's going to be a level of software driving and processing the signal that's going to mean that you just can't avoid a lighting refresh rate issue. And that's not a fun zone, nerdy zone that we're going to go into, because in different countries, lights have different refresh rates, which means that one camera setup in the UK is going to be different to a camera setup in the US because of the way that the electricity works and how that all cycles. It's really, it can get really deep. But with webcam, you're going to have to forgive some stuff, whilst when you go higher grade like what you've got there, Jesse, you're going to have less to forgive, and the signal just gets a little bit higher in quality. I can see we got a little question come in there.
We do. And I'm trying to remember how to put it up. So House of Jen, similar to trying to take a picture of a TV with one's phone, or taking screenshots of your computer with a cell phone. And yeah, it's very much like that. And just a slight tangent. I don't understand why so many people take pictures of their screens. I'm assuming
That's all
PCs are the
screenshotters.
same way, but Macs have a built-in screen capture, Command Shift
there's-
5.
There's a button. It's upside down here, but it says print screen on it. That's because it'll print your screen, buddy. And then you just copy paste. Easiest path. I feel your pain. Continue.
But thank you for your comment, House of Jen, and welcome back. But one of the big things when it comes to video is that, and I'm sure a lot of people, I know a lot of podcasters don't quite get this, but it seems that video, people who are into, like the experts on YouTube, the number one advice they always give you is your audio quality is more important than the video. You can get away with lower quality video if your audio sounds good. So having great video, I mean, everything just comes back to that audio quality. If your audio quality isn't good enough, people aren't going to watch. So that should always be one of your priorities. Getting video using your cell phone, you're going to have good enough video quality that you're not pushing anybody away. And that's what it's all about when we're creating content, is we need to create content that people enjoy consuming. So that means the audio has to be good enough to the individual listener or viewer. We all have different thresholds of what is good enough. So we need to try to figure out where the threshold of most of our audience is and deliver at least that. I'm not someone who advocates going out and buying a ton of expensive equipment, because the law of diminishing returns, you're not going to get a significant improvement in quality going from $150, $200 with the Brio 4K versus a $1,500 mirrorless setup. You'll get some improvements, but it's not going to have an impact on whether somebody watches your video.
Yeah.
So that's what it's all about. We need to put out the best quality we can and start addressing any deficiencies as we go. So start with the cell phone and something like a Samsung Q2U or an ATR 2100X. You already have the phone, I'm assuming, $50 to $100 for a USB mic, and you can produce good enough videos and podcasts. I've done a ton of higher end shows for Podfly where we're using Q2Us or 2100Xs. We get professional quality audio because we take the time to set up the mic. If my mic's sitting up here like this, I'm not going to sound good. And my voice is so quiet, you might not even be able to hear me, so I don't know.
No,
That's why positioning is so important. And the closer you are to the mic, the more you minimize the impact of poor acoustics or other sounds. There's this misconception amongst some people that there's noise rejection in mics. Mics are stupid devices. They're like ears. They either hear something or they don't. They're not smart enough to go, oh, that's air conditioning. I need to ignore that. The example I like to give is if you can hear the sound in your room, your microphone hears it too.
Yeah. Your ears are microphones. Like they are picking up a signal and delivering an electrical signal to your brain to tell you what you're hearing. That's how the microphone works as well. The microphone has a membrane in it that vibrates when it hears sound and sends an electrical signal to wherever it's going. The only justifiable case is when you fully nerd out again, that dynamic microphones tend to have a lower gain, more effective cardioid function that doesn't pick up as much, but it still picks things up. And you can test this yourself. If you've got one right now, record yourself saying something, get a bit of room tone, and then boost that room tone. Don't boost the audio that you're saying, boost the room tone, and you'll see little waveforms that you didn't know were there. That is the person sneezing 4 houses down the street, or a car backfiring 12 blocks away. It definitely picks up all that stuff, but it makes it easier to edit out. That's why the dynamic, I think, is better in that place. But it will hear everything.
Yeah, it'll hear everything. I mean, there was one show I was working on where I can't remember the situation, but when I did the noise and reverb, it was just the reverb reduction. When I cleaned up the audio, took out all of the reverb, you could hear it was either a ticking clock. Actually, I think it was a fan. I think he had a fan turning with the chain that would hit the frame of the fan. So you just heard this ticking sound. I thought it was like a grandfather clock. I'd asked him and he said no, and it had to have been a ceiling fan. But there's a lot of stuff that reverb and noise can bury. But kind of to your point, condenser mics have much higher sensitivity. That's why they are used for a lot of times recording vocals and other stuff where you want that kind of sensitivity. Dynamic mics don't have as much sensitivity. That's why they need more gain. And the closer you get the mic to your mouth, it's all about maximizing the signal to noise ratio. The more direct your voice is into the mic, the less it's going to pick up everything else around you, because you don't need to use so much gain. So you're not boosting that reverb, those poor acoustics.
Yep. Which is why people say move closer to your microphone to avoid reverb. Not because it magically makes the reverb go away, but it means that the reverb is lower because you're closer and louder. And it just makes sense. What do we got there?
House of Jen says, hoodie strings are the bane of my existence. I can only assume we're talking about them rubbing against clothing and being picked up by the microphone. And it's one of those things. If you're aware of that, figure out a way to get them so they're not moving around. Or I guess maybe not wear a hoodie, but I don't want to tell you not to wear a hoodie because I know how comfortable hoodies are. I love it when I can wear a hoodie outside. We're in that kind of that time of year where it's perfect for wearing hoodies. And me and Tara both love that time of year because they're just so comfortable. So I'd advise finding a way to maybe tie the hoodie strings so they don't just flap around.
Yeah. But I think it's for every podcaster that becomes aware of this stuff and like ties a knot before they record their podcast in the hoodie strings, there's someone who has to edit for a client who never figures it out, has finally got video on their show. So they get their fancy wooden necklaces with big baubles, and they get their big jangly kind of, wristlets that you put on, and they accentuate the things they say, and you get jingle, 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 and then microphone bashes around on a wooden necklace, and they look good. They look great. But when you get it in post-production and you can't be there for the recording, you put your head in your hands for a little while and figure out what you're going to tell the client or what you're not going to tell the client about the audio, because they may not hear it, about what you could do to try and fix it. And I think there's a lot of communities that, triumphantly say, I can edit that out because I spent 6 hours chopping every single instance of every little tick and then found that specific frequency in the spectral editor and erased every single time it popped in. And I'm great. but you also spent an entire day editing 30 minutes of audio when that person could have just not worn the necklace. I'm sorry, you hit a nerve there. I don't think it was even your fault.
No, I mean, there is an element of like God complex amongst editors. And
Yep.
I don't say that in a negative way. It's just what I've experienced. That whole mentality of, look what I did, and the client is never going to know. Spending time chopping up words or putting in all of this effort to do something that really the client isn't paying for, and the client should have been paying attention to stop in the first place.
It's I think we talked about it on a previous stream as well, that you can spend the time to get to the level where you can overcorrect and do too much, but you eventually have to dial it back to what is feasible, what you can get out the door, and what doesn't occupy all your time and justifies whatever cost per hour you're getting paid to do it. Because the client's going to pay you the same, presumably, for something that has pristine audio and something that has, floppy necklace, gesticulating wristlets audio. So just keep that in mind.
And to comment on what you'd said, even if you are able to be at the recording, it can be challenging to get people to modify their behavior. I've sat in recordings where someone's recording with earbuds. They've got long hair, the cords are flapping against the microphone, or the hair's flapping against the microphone. Before we start, I asked her to hold the cable away and put her hair back, but she didn't want to tie it back. She just put it behind her, but as she was talking, it came forward, kept rubbing. And then even when the hair wasn't the issue, it was the mic rustling against the clothing. I'd stopped a couple of times to remind her to hold it. After a couple of times, there's nothing you can do. People, and I think this is another thing I see people comment on, is, yes, you want to be paying attention and stop the recording when you need to, but at certain times you have to realize, if it's a behavior, chances are we're not going to be able to stop it. And the more we stop it, the more we interfere with the flow. And whether you're the recording engineer or the person who's just recording the show because you don't have an engineer, you've got to make that decision. And if you don't stop it, because we posted a comment a couple of weeks ago about someone who was working with audio, where the host had a guest who had a baby in the room with them crying throughout the show. If you're the one responsible for recording that, stop the show and ask them if the baby needs to be there. Maybe they couldn't find a babysitter. We don't know the situation. But if the baby has to be in the room, ask them, hey, can we reschedule for a time where you can be completely free to participate? Because my audience isn't going to want to listen to this, and we can't just remove any noise we don't want from the audio. It just doesn't work that way.
Yep. And all kudos to new mothers that can't, just discard their babies for pristine sound recordings. It's not always going to be able to happen. But, do we need to record at another time? Is there a place that, a better time in your calendar where we can find you at an opportune moment, when you have more cognitive availability? That would be the best way to approach that. But yeah, you're absolutely spot on. There's nothing you can do.
I missed an earlier comment from Jen. The best equipment won't help bad mic work or good room treatment. could we talk about best practices? Preach on the, if you can hear it, the mic can hear it. I've said that so many times. And I think we did discuss this. Maybe I subconsciously knew that question was going to come up. But yeah,
I
that's...
I think it was up there already. But
yeah, I
House
missed
of
it.
No, it's all good though. Like it's all just flowed in a certain way. And House of Gen, we've started at room treatment. So if you can catch the replay, I think we spend about the first 15, 20 minutes talking about room treatment, best practices, and the way that it affects microphone signal, and how it's the best thing that you can do before you get started on the microphone deep dive.
And another one, have you all covered mic placement and how loud outbreaths can create unintended plosives? So when it comes to mic placement, it's always hard to tell on video. I'm about 1.5 to 2 inches away. You'll see that, maybe not. Let's see if we can go to a wide view. This doesn't really show much either, but I've got the mic at about a 45-degree angle to my face. So I'm not talking directly into it. It's catching the corner of my mouth. The higher up we get the mic and aim it down, sorry for the windscreen noise, we want to get out of the way of the nose so that we're not breathing directly into it. And that's how you sort of minimize the plosives from breathing. And I can't position it directly under my nose without changing everything. But if we had it kind of on a desk type setup where it's below us, in line with your nose, it's going to pick up all of those breaths. That's why the best audio or positioning for a mic is going to be off to the side, aimed at the corner of the mouth. And usually getting it up higher and angled downwards can also help by minimizing some of the sibilance range too.
Yeah. So this is the upward facing thing that you were talking about. And I'm currently unprocessed, so you should be able to hear when I breathe out, like
we do.
Yeah, I just came off a run, and it's a tough life. But there's a great little prompt that I have for people who use headsets, because the proliferation of podcasting in business is that people are going to have the standard video conferencing headsets available to them. It's going to be your Jabras, your Dell somethings, I can't even remember. But we're talking about headphones with the microphone attached that can be oscillated as needed. Generally what I do for guests or hosts who are present in a recording with me and are currently about to record an episode is I do this. I tell them, make sure that the microphone arm is at the same level as your nose. This means it's sitting above the nose, and that any air that comes out of your nose is shooting past the microphone instead of going into it. And it's a very easy little, it looks unusual, you'll feel weird, but there are too many people who strap it to the side of their mouth like that and think that proximity is the best way to do it, but it catches every single little breath. So just do this, and if they've got a microphone like this, then tell them to, 45 degrees, a couple of inches away, and then get them to do what, again, referencing back to the beginning of the stream, what Bandrew Scott does, Podcastage does for his plosive tests, which is, it's bring me pizza pronto. But I say, do you like pineapple on your pizza? And that's a good plosive test. Because if you are going directly into it, all those P's mean that you're going pineapple pizza. You get yourself some peppers on a pizza pronto. If you can hear that as someone present in the recording, you can go, buddy, let's rotate that around a little bit. Let's point it up to the other corner of the room, have you talk past the screen, and then when they start to creep a little bit closer because they feel like they have to be on the microphone in order for it to pick them up, tell them off once more, and then you should be good. But yeah.
And to talk about plosives for just a minute, the easiest way to figure out where to position it, your mic, is we need to think about what causes a plosive. It's that burst of air. So if you hold your hand up in front of your mouth and go p, p, you'll feel that burst of air on your hand. If you feel it at that position, the mic's going to cause a plosive. If you move your hand off to the side, p, p, you feel less of it. You move it to about 45 degrees, p, p, you don't feel anything. And that's why everybody says you need a windscreen. Actually, you don't. If you position the mic right, you're not going to get plosives. Mine comes with one. It softens the sound a little bit. I also have it on there to protect it, but it has a massive impact on the sound. What are we staring at?
Sorry, I thought you'd muted yourself just in case, and I was going to vamp there. But I didn't notice that that's the Earthworks ethos, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, that it's got such a thin grill on it. You definitely need the windscreen for that.
Yeah, it's...
Absolutely.
I mean, this is basically what an SM7B looks like inside, just it's a little bit smaller.
There you go.
But it also rolls off some of the high end and sibilants, and it's designed to be on there. It helps protect the transducer, the element inside the mic. And as you can tell by looking at it, I have cats, so I have cat hair everywhere. I don't want that getting into the mic, so it functions as a nice lint trap too.
Whereas mine doesn't have anything on it. The Electro Voice RE320, for anyone curious. And it's metal grilled with just a little bit of foam in the top, as this is end address. So there's actually very little in here, and you can buy a very small pop filter that you can put right on the top. And that's the other type as well, not just the on-microphone stuff, but the pop filters you can buy that are in a little circle. It's like a thin material fabric that you place in front of your mouth as you're talking to absorb some of the vibration and the air. A lot of people might come in and say, well, just use one of those, and then you can get away with having it directly in front of your mouth. But angling it away removes the issue, whereas the pop filter mitigates the issue, where it either absorbs the vibration and diffuses some of the air before it gets to the microphone to kind of like split off what might be a burst of or gust of wind from your mouth that will turn it into a plosive. That gives you a chance that it will disappear, but it's not zero. Whereas angling it to the side, that is definitely zero, unless you can't talk without, rotating your head back and forth.
Well, and to geek out just for a second more, what you were just describing, the circular one that goes in front of the mic, that's a pop filter compared to a windscreen like this. Pop filters are meant to be completely transparent to the sound. They're not going to change it at all. They're just breaking up that air so you're not causing plosives. Pop filter, stopping the pop. Windscreens,
Yep.
They're not transparent, as we could tell when I took it off. It filters off some of the higher frequencies, so they color the sound some, and mics like this, the SM7B, any mic that has a windscreen, they're tuned to compensate for that. If you put a windscreen on a mic that wasn't built for it, it might be changing the sound more than you actually want it to. Like I see people put windscreens on all sorts of mics, and I think something like a Yeti, it's probably not going to hurt because it has it has more, it doesn't really have a higher frequency range, but that sensitivity gives you more, it captures more of the high end frequencies. So that could kind of tame it down a little bit. But if you're using a dynamic mic that might already be kind of dark, throwing a windscreen on top of it might not be helping you any, other than stopping your plosives.
Yeah. It's kind of the reason I brought up the pop filter when you were talking about the windscreen. They are very different products, but I think people tend to work in tiers depending on how much they can deal with. Like if they must have the microphone in front of them, then they will need either a pop filter or a windscreen. The windscreens are called that for a very specific reason, that they will absorb some of the wind elements out in public if you're in the open air or if it's in a windy place. And that's why you'll see windscreens and dead cats and stuff like that attached to microphones to try and diffuse some of that wind before it gets to the microphone. In some cases, microphones can be so sensitive to those things that you need a windscreen on the microphone itself to be able to do it, to prevent the sounds. But as you said, doing that affects the signal. So you have to balance what you do depending on how you want, what type of sound you want to get out of it, or how much, or what type of post-production you do. There's just solutions to everything.
And again, it goes back to the whole idea that it just needs to sound good enough. I know so many people have particularities. They want to have the mic right in front of them, or they don't want the mic seen on camera at all. Just know that you are compromising, but it's your show, it's your podcast. You can do what's best for you. But if you find you're not reaching as large of an audience as you want, you might want to consider that could be contributing. I'm not saying it is, but it's something to consider.
Definitely.
And we've got one last comment, and then I think we'll wrap it up because we've definitely gone a lot longer than planned. I didn't realize it was this late already. So
No, for anyone who might not be aware, daylight savings changes in America 3 weeks ahead of where I am in Ireland in GMT. So I think your internal clock is ready to stop now because that's when we used to stop in your time. But for my time, it's exactly the same, so I don't actually feel the difference. But anyway, continue, because I'm ready to...
What is a dead cat? I haven't heard that term before. Dead cat it's basically a windscreen, but it's fluffy. Right there.
Like
I guess you were anticipating, you probably saw that question and were already anticipating it, weren't you?
Well, there was someone I was having a conversation with. They're doing a daily podcast, and they want it to be as authentic as possible while still permitting me to, in post-production, improve the signal while still retaining some of the background noise. And going for a walk to record this daily podcast meant that they went, what type of microphone do I need? Should I use my AirPods? Should I use my phone? Should I use like a DJI lapel mic? And I took a picture recently. This doesn't help wearing a black t-shirt, but for the Rode Wireless Go 2, actually this might be the one, I can't recall. But anyway, you can screw the dead cat on top of where the microphone appears on the device. And this is an omnidirectional microphone, so it's more important to do it on one of these. But it comes with the dead cat attachment so that you can use it in public. And in other contexts, it will look less like this, and more like kind of more fluffy, like a tabby cat sort of color. Like it looks very distinct compared to the color of the original microphone product. But that's essentially what it is. It's like strapping a dead cat to your microphone to absorb and redirect some of the wind before it makes its way into the microphone. That's more of an industry term, I think.
But please don't kill any cats and put them on your microphones.
No, you can buy pre-unalived cats to attach to your microphones. Yeah, do that. Don't go around murdering cats. It's not a good thing.
No. Cat lover here can't advocate for that. I don't even like the term.
Cats. No.
What?
There are other terms. I just can't recall what they are. Anyway, that's what it is, House of Jen. A television movie-making microphone product to avoid wind.
Yep. So, thanks everybody for watching, and we'll be back next week to blabber on about whatever we decide to talk about next week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See you, everybody.